So welcome, and this week we're going to be talking about politics and society. We just finished talking about science and about how science can help us know whether things are safe or not. Why should we care about politics?
This is one of the most interesting things about the scientists that I work with. They always say that, but the science is settled, Ron. And I think, well, but that doesn't really settle much of anything in the real world for several reasons that we've already discussed. For example, there is a politics of science. We've learned about that in terms of transmission of scientific knowledge, the way that it's affected by transnational advocacy groups that have a vested interest in emphasizing some things, de-emphasizing others. We've talked about the kind of cherry picking of data so that there's no real consensus on GMOs. You can always find the case that doesn't seem to fit the pattern, and so the science never really gets settled, unlike climate change, which took quite a while to get to that state. And then climate change gives us another really good example of why solid science took a long time for nation states to bury some of their interests, to come to some cooperative arrangements, and even then, getting the science into public policy is daunting because of the power of economic interest. So there are a number of factors that explain differences across countries, that the science itself is almost never decisive. And I guess the final example I think of, because I care about kids, is that universal vaccination would be in the interest of everybody. We know that. It's been clearly established. And yet there are social movements that are resulting in the United States in lowered rates of vaccination, losing herd immunity, and increasing childhood diseases, not based on sound science, but rather based on these social mechanisms of information movement and politics around information that turns out to be scientifically invalid.
So in other words, the science may be able to tell us whether they're safe or not, but they can't tell us whether we should actually do it or not.
And some of these things are non-addressable by science. We've talked about that a bit, right? That the nature of the unnatural. If you fundamentally believe that this kind of modification is unnatural, that is against God's will, that it's realm, as Prince Charles says, in the realm that belong to God and God alone, then you're unlikely to buy into it no matter what the scientific tests tell you coming out of laboratories.
So we're going to start out by looking at a very interesting case, GMO papaya, that really doesn't fall into the categories of many of the arguments against GMOs, and look at how this played out in terms of regulation and policy. And from there, we're going to broaden out and look at why GMOs prevail in some areas and don't in others, how those policies got formed, and what shaped those regulations.